She had long ago decided that tenderness was a luxury meant for other women. Lady Eleanor Whitmore learned restraint before she learned hope. In the quiet countryside of Kent, where fog drifted across low stone fences and the morning smelled of damp earth and rosemary, she had been taught to keep her voice measured and her gaze steady. It was not her natural disposition. Once, as a child, she had laughed freely in the drawing rooms of her father's London townhouse. Once she had believed that her mother's silences were merely habits of gentleness, but silence, she later discovered, could also be fear. By the time she was 16, she understood that love, when placed in the wrong hands, could become a weapon. The official account of Lady Helena Whitmore's death had been brief. A fall, a fever, a frail constitution. Society rarely inquired beyond what was convenient. Physicians signed papers. Clergymen murmured condolences. Neighbours lowered their eyes and resumed their dinners. Eleanor did not weep at the funeral. She stood beside her father, Lord Edmund Whitmore, baronet of modest title but ambitious hunger, and watched the coffin descend into earth that seemed far too eager to receive it. 3 weeks later, she was sent away. It was presented as an act of kindness. A delicate young lady, it was said, should not linger in a house shadowed by grief. Kent would be restorative. Fresh air, distant cousins, the guidance of a respectable country physician. What society did not know, what society never cared to know, was that exile is rarely gentle. Dr. Alistair Harrow, the rural physician entrusted with her guardianship, was a widower with ink-stained fingers and a mind more curious than polite society deemed appropriate. He did not treat Eleanor as fragile porcelain. He handed her books on anatomy. He allowed her to observe surgeries. He spoke plainly of illness, blood, and consequence. Under his mentorship, she discovered something extraordinary. Knowledge did not bruise. Years passed. In London, her half-sister, Lady Beatrice Whitmore, bloomed beneath chandeliers and admiration. Beatrice inherited their father's appetite for status. She was charming when watched and venomous when unseen. The city adored her. Invitations multiplied. Eleanor remained in Kent, where she learned the language of roots and remedies. She cultivated medicinal gardens. She studied fevers. She listened to soldiers returned from war, their hands trembling long after cannons had fallen silent. She built herself anew, and she waited. In the spring of 1818, a letter arrived bearing a seal she had not expected. Blackmore. The name alone altered the air in the room. His Grace, Sebastian Ashcroft, Duke of Blackmore, had formally requested the fulfillment of a long-forgotten childhood agreement between their families. An understanding drafted when Eleanor had still worn ribbons in her hair and believed that adults told truths. A betrothal contract. Her father's reply travelled swiftly. Lady Beatrice, he declared, would be honoured to assume the arrangement. But the Duke refused. He requested the elder daughter, Eleanor. The countryside had taught her many things. One of them was that powerful men rarely acted without intention. Sebastian Ashcroft was not merely a duke. He was a war general who had commanded regiments during the final years of the Napoleonic campaigns. His reputation preceded him like frost before winter. He was said to be merciless in negotiation, emotionless in conflict, unmoved by scandal. 2 previous engagements had dissolved quietly. Society whispered that prospective brides had retreated of their own accord. He was not known to pursue. He was known to claim. Dr. Harrow watched Eleanor as she read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. "You do not appear surprised," he observed. "I am not," she replied. She had anticipated that London would summon her one day. Her father's debts had grown. The estate's accounts were unstable. Rumours drifted even to Kent. Something was rotting beneath polished floors. If she became Duchess of Blackmore, she would gain access to documents, influence, and proximity to Parliament. Her father had manipulated inheritance papers upon her mother's death. Eleanor had long suspected it. Marriage, for most women of her rank, was a surrender. For her, it would be strategy. She agreed. London welcomed her return with the same false warmth it offered every scandal disguised as romance. Lord Edmund greeted her not with affection, but assessment. He studied her posture, her composure. The absence of fear in her expression unsettled him more than any accusation might have. Beatrice's smile, meanwhile, held sweetness sharpened at the edges. "You look altered," her sister remarked. "I am," Eleanor answered calmly. The first meeting between Lady Eleanor Whitmore and the Duke of Blackmore took place not in a ballroom, but in her father's study. It was an intentional choice. Sebastian Ashcroft entered without ceremony. Tall, severe, his dark coat immaculate, his gaze colder than the marble busts lining the shelves. He did not bow deeply. He observed. Eleanor did not curtsy excessively. She met his eyes. There was a stillness between them that unsettled even Lord Edmund. "You have been residing in Kent," the Duke said at last. "Yes, Your Grace." "Among physicians?" "Yes." A pause. "You are aware of the obligations this arrangement entails?" "I'm aware of the obligations placed upon me since birth." A faint shift in his expression. Not amusement, not approval, recognition. He dismissed her father with minimal politeness. When they were alone, the air altered. "Tell me plainly, Lady Eleanor," he said, voice low and precise. "Do you enter this engagement willingly?" Willingness was an indulgent word. "I enter it knowingly." His gaze sharpened. "Most women seek advantage in marriage. Most women have little else permitted to them. And you?" She did not hesitate. "I seek access." Silence expanded between them. Instead of offense, something else flickered across his face. Interest. "I do not provide softness," he warned. "I do not require it." It was not defiance, it was fact. For the first time, Sebastian Ashcroft regarded her not as a bride, but as a mind. Outside the study, Beatrice listened behind closed doors, her knuckles white against painted wood. The engagement was announced within the week. Society responded predictably. Surprise, speculation, envy, relief that scandal would be replaced by spectacle. But beneath silks and smiles, currents moved. Eleanor Whitmore had returned to London not to secure affection. She had returned to dismantle a lie, and she had chosen as her instrument the coldest man in England. What neither of them yet understood was that frost, when held long enough against unguarded skin, does not remain untouched. Sometimes it yields, and sometimes it burns. Night fell early in London that season, as if the city itself preferred not to witness what men did behind respectable doors. Eleanor returned to her childhood room at Whitmore House and found it smaller than memory had promised. The wallpaper still carried faint roses, too cheerful, too naive. The hearth gave little warmth, and the silence in the corridors was not peace, but vigilance. She slept lightly. Near midnight, a soft sound drew her upright. Fabric whispering, a careful step, the slightest scrape of wood. Not a servant, not a mouse. Eleanor moved without lighting a candle. Dr. Harrow had taught her how to breathe quietly, how to listen for the difference between accident and intent. She reached beneath the mattress for the small object she kept hidden there, a slim vial of powdered lime and valerian, mixed into a sting that would blind and burn long enough to buy her time. The door creaked. A shadow entered. Eleanor's body went still. A man's voice, low, roughened by drink or cruelty, murmured something she could not fully catch. A hand reached for the edge of her bed. Eleanor threw the powder. The shadow jerked back with a choking curse. She did not scream. She did not waste breath on panic. She darted past him, barefoot on cold floorboards, and slipped into the corridor. A second shadow waited at the far end, so it was not a lone intruder. It was a plan. She made for the back staircase, heart steady but quick, and reached the servant passage that ran behind the walls like a secret artery of the house. There, half open, narrow, smelling faintly of coal dust, was a door she remembered from girlhood. She slid through it and pulled it shut with only the gentlest click. Then she heard the voices. Lady Beatrice's voice first, sweet with indignation. She must be taken tonight, before she has time to charm anyone. And her father's, colder than the marble in the entrance hall. She will do as she is told. Marriage is decided by fathers, not daughters. Eleanor pressed her palm to her mouth, not to silence sobs, there were none, but to contain the urge to laugh at the sheer bluntness of it. They were not merely marrying her off, they were selling her. The name of the man they intended for her did not carry a title as grand as a duke, but it carried something worse, authority without restraint. A powerful magistrate's son, from the outskirts of Kent, rumoured to drink, gamble and ruin women as if they were wages. The sort of man families feared and still courted, because fear often dressed itself as prestige. Beatrice wanted him. Not for herself, of course. For Eleanor, to remove her, to silence her, to keep inheritance papers buried where they belonged. Eleanor exhaled slowly. A strange calm settled over her. If they wished to cage her, then she would choose the cage with the largest door. She would not be dragged into a marriage that ended in disappearance. If marriage was to be her instrument, she would align herself with a man who could crush her father with a sentence. And there was only one man in London who could do that without blinking. Blackmore. By morning, her father's household was in uproar about her wandering at night. Eleanor apologized with impeccable manners. She offered tea with hands that did not tremble. She allowed her father to scold her, Beatrice to smirk, and the servants to whisper. Then she did something none of them expected. She asked to ride alone. It was unusual. It was improper. It was dangerous. Eleanor requested it anyway, sweetly, as if it were a whim. Lord Edmund granted permission, confident that the city would frighten the country-grown daughter into obedience. He did not understand what Dr. Harrow had done to her. He had given her more than knowledge. He had given her a spine made of iron. Eleanor rode toward Mayfair with her hood pulled low and her mind fixed. She needed one thing before she faced the Duke again. Proof, not suspicion, not instinct. Something tangible. In a narrow lane behind a gentleman's club, one of those private places where men gathered to gamble, drink, and pretend their sins were not sins at all, she saw it. A struggle at the mouth of the alley. A man pinned against brick, hands raised, face pale with terror. And the other figure, still as a statue, dark coat unwrinkled, posture effortless, was unmistakable even in poor light. Sebastian Ashcroft. He was not shouting. He did not need to. His presence alone seemed to drain the street of air. The pinned man begged. Eleanor caught fragments, traitor, stolen dispatch, a seal, a document meant for the War Office. It was not merely theft. It was treason. Eleanor should have turned away. A sensible lady would have fled and pretended she saw nothing. But Eleanor was not sensible in the way society meant. She moved closer. A loose stone shifted beneath her boot. The sound betrayed her. Sebastian's head turned sharply. His gaze locked onto the shadowed corner where she stood. For one moment, the entire world felt held in his attention. Then, with a simple gesture, he dismissed his men with the pinned traitor in tow. The alley emptied. Only the Duke remained. Eleanor's pulse did not quicken from fear. It quickened from calculation. He stepped toward her as if he had always known she would appear in places she should not. "Lady Eleanor?" he said, voice quiet, dangerous. "How fortunate," she replied, keeping her own voice steady. His eyes narrowed. "You are either reckless or you are deliberate. Those are not opposites, Your Grace." A faint pause, as if he weighed her, the way one weighs a blade. Then his gaze flicked downward. Something glinted at her belt, half hidden beneath her cloak, a small pistol, a dueling piece, elegant and deadly in the right hands. Eleanor had taken it without thinking earlier, in the rush of the alley, because her body still remembered what it was to be threatened in the dark. "You stole from me," Sebastian said, not loud, not angry, simply factual. "I borrowed," Eleanor corrected. He stepped closer. "So you are armed?" "Yes." "So you are frightened?" "No." He studied her face as if searching for trembling he did not find. "Give it back," he said. Eleanor lifted her chin. "Tell me first," she replied softly, "if you always punish men who take what belongs to you." The air shifted, his eyes sharpened again. "You are testing the edge of my patience. I am testing the edge of your character." That finally earned a flicker, something like amusement, quickly smothered. "You are bold," he said, "and you are used to being obeyed." His gaze dropped again to the pistol. "You have no understanding of what that is," he said. "I understand what it prevents," Eleanor answered. Another step. Now he was close enough that she could smell winter on him, cold air, leather, faint smoke. His voice lowered. "Your father's house is not safe," he said. The words struck like a bell. Eleanor's throat tightened, not from fear, but from the confirmation she had not wanted. "You know," she whispered. "I know enough." She held the pistol, but she did not point it. She could not win against him by force. She could only win by choosing the moment. So she made a bargain, not with desperation, but with intention. "I will return it," Eleanor said, her voice even, "if you give me something in exchange." His gaze flicked to her mouth as if he disliked the direction of his own thoughts. "What would you ask for, Lady Eleanor?" Eleanor's heart beat once, slow and controlled. "A promise," she said. His eyes narrowed again. "Promises are cheap." "Then make it costly," she replied. He was silent. Eleanor could hear distant carriage wheels, laughter from the club, the city continuing as if nothing mattered. Then she lifted her face and said the most dangerous words a woman could offer a man like him. "Kiss me," Eleanor murmured, "and I will know whether your word is worth anything at all." Sebastian Ashcroft did not move. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, as if deciding whether she was the most foolish woman he had ever met, or the most extraordinary. When he finally stepped in, it was not gentle, it was not tender, it was controlled in the way a storm is controlled, by the laws of nature, not mercy. His mouth met hers once, firm, decisive, a kiss that stole breath, not innocence, a kiss that felt like a claim. Then he pulled back, eyes dark, voice lower than before. "Now you have your proof," he said. Eleanor's lungs struggled to remember how to work. She forced herself to speak. "And you have your pistol." She handed it to him. He took it without breaking eye contact. "You should not barter with men," he said. "I do not barter," Eleanor answered, her voice a shade rougher than she intended. "I negotiate." Sebastian's gaze held hers, unreadable. Then he spoke the sentence that changed the direction of her plan entirely. "I will come for you," he said, "before anyone else can." Eleanor's heart did not soften, not yet. But somewhere beneath her ribs, something dangerous stirred. Not love, not trust. Something sharper, hope perhaps, or the beginning of it. And behind the bright windows of Whitmore House, Lady Beatrice watched London's gossip makers like a hawk watches a field. She had not yet seen the kiss, but she would soon smell it, and she would not forgive it. London had always preferred spectacle to truth. Within days of Eleanor's return, invitations began to arrive in a cascade of perfumed envelopes. The engagement to the Duke of Blackmore had transformed her from exile to fascination. Women who once pitied her absence now sought her company. Men who had forgotten her existence remembered her lineage. But admiration in Mayfair was rarely benign. It was calculation dressed as civility. The governor of Kent's spring ball promised to be the first true unveiling of the future Duchess of Blackmore. The chandeliers alone were rumoured to rival Versailles. Music would spill into the gardens. Parliament men, decorated officers, titled widows, and ambitious daughters would attend. Eleanor prepared without haste. Her gown was not ostentatious. Pale ivory silk, simple cut, long sleeves modest by fashion's shifting standards. She chose not to compete with Beatrice's brilliance. Her sister favoured scarlet that evening, a bold declaration of presence. Eleanor preferred strategy to spectacle. As her maid fastened the final buttons, Eleanor studied herself in the mirror. She did not look like a woman in love. She looked like a woman entering negotiation. When she descended the staircase at Whitmore House, Lord Edmund watched her with narrowed approval. A successful alliance with Blackmore would stabilise debts, restore reputation, and silence any lingering murmurs about his late wife. Beatrice's gaze, however, was sharper. "You have learned to dress like a duchess," she said lightly. "I have learned to survive," Eleanor replied. The carriage ride to the governor's estate passed in silence thick with unspoken rivalry. Upon arrival, the air shimmered with candlelight and orchestral strings. The grand hall stretched high and gilded, mirrors reflecting 100 versions of every smile. And at the far end of the room stood Sebastian Ashcroft. He wore black, as always. Not the fashionable midnight blue of younger lords, but a shade so dark it seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Medals from the war rested discreetly against his chest. His posture was unyielding. Women glanced toward him, then quickly away. Men watched him more carefully. He was not charming. He was formidable. When Eleanor entered, his gaze found her immediately. It did not wander. It did not waver. He approached without urgency, as if crossing a battlefield rather than a ballroom. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing with restrained precision, "Your Grace." The musicians shifted into a waltz. It was not yet proper for newly engaged couples to dance so openly without ceremony, but Sebastian extended his hand nonetheless. The room noticed. Eleanor placed her gloved fingers in his. The first turn of the dance was measured, the second closer. His hand at her waist was steady, not possessive, but undeniably firm. "You look prepared," he murmured. "For what?" she asked. "For war." She allowed herself the faintest smile. "Then we are well matched." Around them, whispers thickened. Two former fiancés of the Duke stood near a column, studying Eleanor with mixed curiosity and relief. She could feel their assessment. They had retreated from this man. She had stepped forward. "Your sister watches," Sebastian said quietly. Eleanor's gaze flicked across the room. Beatrice stood near a group of influential matrons, laughter bright but eyes cold. "She believes she can still undo this," Eleanor said. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly. "Can she?" "Not without risk." The music swelled, their bodies moved in seamless rhythm. Then, subtle at first, a murmur rippled from the ceiling. A faint metallic groan. Eleanor's instincts sharpened before her mind formed thought. The chandelier above the eastern quadrant trembled. One chain had loosened. Guests below it laughed, unaware. Sebastian's gaze shifted upward a fraction of a second before the metal snapped. The crash would have been catastrophic. Glass, flame, iron. Instead, Sebastian's arm locked around Eleanor's waist and propelled her sideways in a swift, controlled motion. The chandelier shattered where she had stood moments earlier. Screams erupted. Smoke and splintered crystal filled the air. Sebastian did not release her. His body shielded hers until servants extinguished the fallen candles. Silence followed, thick and shaken. Eleanor's pulse thundered, but not from fear, from certainty. This had not been accident. Sebastian looked down at her, his expression no longer merely cold, it was calculating. "Was this meant for you?" he asked quietly. "Or for me?" Eleanor's breath steadied. "For me," she answered. He studied her face for deception. Found none. Across the hall, Beatrice's gloved hand trembled just slightly. Too slightly for most to notice. Not for Eleanor. Not for Sebastian. The Duke turned to the governor with composed authority. "Your Excellency," he said calmly, "I suggest an inspection of your fixtures." His tone carried no accusation, yet the implication was clear. Sabotage in a governor's ballroom was not merely scandal. It was offence. Within minutes, guests resumed uneasy conversation. The orchestra attempted another piece, though the melody lacked its former grace. Sebastian guided Eleanor toward a quieter gallery overlooking the gardens. "You were not surprised," he said once they were alone. "I have grown accustomed to danger," she replied. "You should not have to." The statement was not tender, it was resolute. Eleanor turned toward him. "You warned me my father's house was not safe. And now," he asked, "now I believe nowhere is safe." His gaze darkened. "I will not tolerate attempts on what is mine." The word lingered. Mine. Eleanor stiffened slightly. "I'm not a possession." His jaw tightened, but he did not withdraw. "I am aware." Silence stretched between them. Below, lanterns flickered in the garden breeze. "You are not frightened," he observed. "I have been frightened before," she answered softly. "It no longer governs me." His eyes searched hers again, not for weakness this time, but for truth. "What governs you?" he asked. She hesitated, not because she lacked answer, because answer meant vulnerability. "Justice," she said at last. The word did not leave her lightly. Sebastian absorbed it. "You seek something," he said. "Yes. And marriage to me provides access." "Yes." He did not flinch at her honesty. Instead, something shifted in his expression. An acknowledgement. "You are more dangerous than they realize," he murmured. "Perhaps," she replied. He stepped closer. Not close enough to scandalize. Close enough to lower his voice. "If someone attempts such harm again," he said, "I will respond without restraint." Eleanor believed him. She did not mistake his restraint for gentleness. It was discipline, controlled power. Across the hall, Beatrice approached Lord Edmund, her composure cracking beneath the veneer of poise. "It should have fallen," she whispered. Her father's eyes hardened. "Then we must choose a subtler method." In the gallery, Eleanor felt the weight of unseen threads tightening. Sebastian extended his arm once more. "Shall we return," he asked, "and allow them to wonder whether it was coincidence or warning?" Eleanor placed her hand in his. "Let them wonder," she said. As they re-entered the ballroom, conversation stilled briefly. They walked side by side, not as a frightened bride and her rescuer, but as two figures who had survived something together. The frost around the Duke had not melted, not yet, but for the first time it had cracked. And Eleanor understood something equally dangerous. If she continued to align herself with him, her vengeance would not be solitary, it would be shared. The thought unsettled her more than the falling chandelier. Because vengeance required clarity, and clarity became fragile in the presence of warmth. There is a particular silence that follows near disaster. It is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of awareness. After the governor's ball, London did not speak openly of sabotage. It spoke of spectacle, of how swiftly the Duke of Blackmore had moved, of how composed Lady Eleanor Whitmore had remained. But beneath the polished retellings, suspicion travelled quietly. Sebastian did not return Eleanor to her father's house that evening. He escorted her himself, not as a gesture of gallantry, as a precaution. The carriage ride through lamplit streets felt narrower than usual. London seemed to lean inward, listening. "You are not shaken," he observed, studying her profile. "I have learned to anticipate hostility," she replied. "That was not hostility." "No," she agreed, "it was intention." His hand tightened slightly on the head of his cane. "From whom?" Eleanor did not answer at once. She turned instead to the window, watching shadows slide past brick facades. "My sister does not forgive easily," she said finally. Sebastian's expression did not change. "Nor do I." There was no threat in his tone, only fact. When the carriage halted before Whitmore House, Sebastian stepped down first. He extended his hand to assist her. Inside, Lord Edmund awaited them. He wore concern like a borrowed coat. "I was informed of the accident," he said. "Terribly unfortunate." "Unfortunate," Sebastian repeated mildly. Their eyes held. Men of power often recognized one another by restraint rather than aggression. Eleanor felt the tension like a thread pulled taut. "I trust your household will take additional care," Sebastian added, his voice even, "until my wedding takes place." Wedding. The word shifted something in the room. Lord Edmund inclined his head. "Of course." Sebastian did not bow deeply. He did not linger. When he left, Eleanor felt the absence immediately. It unsettled her. She despised that. Upstairs, Beatrice paced her chamber in fury. "You failed!" she hissed at her mother, Lady Catherine Whitmore, whose expression was colder than her daughter's. "No," Catherine replied calmly. "We learned." "Learned what?" "That the Duke watches." Beatrice's jaw trembled. "He should have chosen me." "He chose power," Catherine said. "And your sister offers him something we do not yet understand." Eleanor did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her desk and unfolded documents she had brought from Kent. Fragments of letters, old receipts, copies of property transfers, her mother's handwriting. The numbers did not align with the official estate records now filed in London. Funds had vanished months before Helena Whitmore's death. Properties had shifted ownership. Eleanor traced the ink with steady fingers. Her father had not merely been cruel, he had been deliberate. A knock at her chamber door broke the silence. "Lady Eleanor," came her maid's whisper. "A messenger." At this hour, she descended quietly to the servants' entrance. A sealed envelope bore Blackmore's crest. She opened it beneath a single lamp. "Lady Eleanor, an inspection of the governor's ballroom confirms deliberate tampering. The chain was weakened from within. You were correct. If you suspect your family's involvement, I advise caution. Trust no servant who answers solely to Whitmore House. I have placed discreet observation upon your estate. Until we are married, you remain under my protection." S.A. Eleanor read the final line twice. Under my protection. It should have irritated her. Instead, it unsettled her in a different way. Because she had not asked for protection, she had asked for access. And yet, he had acted without demanding explanation. The following morning, London awoke to gossip far louder than broken chandeliers. Lord Edmund's son, Eleanor's half-brother Thomas Whitmore, had lost a substantial sum at White's Club. More than substantial. He had wagered not only personal funds, but a portion of estate collateral, and lost. Eleanor did not express surprise. Thomas's arrogance had long outpaced his intelligence. What did surprise her was the speed with which the Duke intervened. By afternoon, word spread that Blackmore had acquired the debt, quietly, efficiently. Thomas returned home pale and furious. "You have ruined me," he spat at Eleanor when they crossed paths in the corridor. "I was not present at your gambling table," she replied evenly. "You set this in motion." "No," she said softly, "you did." He raised his hand impulsively. The movement stopped mid-air. Sebastian stood behind him. No one had heard his arrival. "Lower it," the Duke said quietly. Thomas obeyed without thinking. It was instinct. Sebastian stepped forward. "You have mortgaged portions of your estate without understanding the consequences," he continued, voice calm. "That is none of your concern." "It became my concern when you wagered land tied to my future Duchess." Thomas swallowed. "You would not dare." "I have already dared," Sebastian interrupted. Eleanor watched in silence. She had planned to expose Thomas's recklessness publicly. She had intended to allow scandal to erode her father's standing. Sebastian had accelerated the process, deliberately. When Thomas stormed away, Eleanor faced the Duke. "You move quickly," she said. "You hesitate," he replied. "This was my strategy." "It remains your strategy," he said. "I merely removed a variable." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You take liberties. I take responsibility." The distinction hovered between them. "You did not consult me," she said. "Would you have objected?" She did not answer, because no, she would not have, but control mattered, and she felt it slipping. "Do not mistake assistance for ownership," she warned. Sebastian stepped closer. "I do not mistake you for fragile." His gaze dropped briefly to the papers in her hand. "You seek to expose forged inheritance documents." It was not a question. Eleanor stilled. "How do you know?" "I have been in war," he said quietly. "I recognize calculated vengeance." The word hung heavy. "You think this is vengeance? I think it is justice sharpened by grief." For the first time since returning to London, Eleanor's composure wavered. Barely. "You do not know what happened in this house," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know men like your father." Silence stretched. "He will not fall easily," Sebastian continued. "He has allies in Parliament. I am aware. And once you expose him," he added, "you will have enemies." "I already do." Their eyes locked. "You intended to leave after your revenge," he said. It was not accusation. It was recognition. Eleanor did not deny it. "Yes." "Without marrying me?" "Yes." A pause. "And you believed I would not notice?" "I believed you would not care." Something flickered in his expression then. Not anger, not amusement, something deeper. "You are wrong," he said quietly. The air shifted. Footsteps approached from the end of the hall. Beatrice. She halted when she saw them standing close. "How touching," she said sweetly. "Conspiracies before the wedding." Sebastian's gaze did not leave Eleanor. "Your sister lacks subtlety," he murmured. "She lacks patience," Eleanor corrected. Beatrice stepped forward. "I hope you are not growing too attached, Your Grace," she said lightly. "My sister has a habit of withdrawing." Sebastian turned slowly toward her. "If she withdraws," he replied, voice smooth and lethal, "it will not be by your design." Beatrice's smile faltered. For the first time she understood. The Duke was no longer indifferent. He was observant, protective, and far less naive than she had assumed. When he departed, Eleanor remained in the corridor alone. The house felt different now, not merely hostile, watched. She returned to her chamber and spread the documents again before her. Forged transfers, altered signatures, evidence of deliberate fraud. Her father would fall. Thomas would lose his standing. Lady Catherine would be socially undone. The plan was unfolding, yet something else troubled her. Sebastian Ashcroft was no longer merely a tool. He was aligning himself willingly, not for title, not for advantage, for her. And that complicated everything, because vengeance was simple. Marriage was simple, but alliance built on sincerity. That was dangerous, and Eleanor Whitmore had never permitted herself the luxury of danger that felt like hope. Reputation in London did not collapse in a single blow. It eroded, whisper by whisper, debt by debt, letter by letter. Within a fortnight of the governor's ball, Thomas Whitmore's recklessness had spread beyond private clubs and into drawing rooms. Creditors began to inquire. Invitations to certain gatherings ceased to arrive. A subtle distancing occurred, polite but unmistakable. Lord Edmund responded with forced composure. He hosted dinners. He smiled wider. He spoke more often of the approaching wedding, as though the Duke of Blackmore's name were a shield capable of deflecting every scandal. Eleanor observed it all with steady eyes. Her plan had always been patient. expose the forged inheritance documents, allow Thomas's gambling to destabilize the estate, force her father into public explanation. She had intended to deliver ruin gradually, but Sebastian was not a patient man when injustice offended him. A formal summons arrived at Whitmore House on a grey afternoon. Parliamentary inquiry, not accusation yet, but review. It concerned irregular estate transfers dating back several years. Eleanor recognized the language immediately. Someone had placed evidence before the right ears. Someone with influence. She did not need to ask who. When Sebastian arrived that evening, he did not look triumphant. He looked resolute. "You moved sooner than I anticipated," she said, meeting him in the smaller morning room. "You delayed longer than I preferred," he replied calmly. "You risk exposing my involvement." "I risk nothing," he said. "I submitted facts." Her gaze sharpened. "You promised protection, and I am protecting you. I did not ask for rescue. You did not need to." Silence pressed between them. The rain against the window sounded like distant applause. "My father will suspect me," Eleanor said quietly. "He already does. And Beatrice resents you. She always has." Sebastian stepped closer, not invading, but present. "You are not alone in this," he said. It was not a declaration of romance. It was an assertion of alliance. Eleanor folded her hands before her to still the faint tremor she refused to acknowledge. "I do not require comfort," she replied. "I am not offering comfort," he said. "I am offering strength." She looked at him fully then, and for the first time she wondered whether he understood the difference between power and devotion. The inquiry moved swiftly. Documents were examined, signatures compared, witnesses discreetly questioned. Lord Edmund's explanation that estate restructuring had been necessary due to temporary financial strain did not withstand scrutiny. The forged signatures, once believed buried beneath time, emerged with humiliating clarity. Helena Whitmore's name had been altered. Transfers of land had occurred weeks before her death. Funds intended for her daughter had vanished into private accounts. The news did not explode. It seeped. And in London, seepage was often more destructive than scandal. Invitations withdrew. Conversations paused when Lord Edmund entered rooms. Thomas's debts became less forgivable. Beatrice's admirers dwindled. At a private luncheon hosted by a prominent duchess, Lady Catherine Whitmore found herself seated not among equals, but at the edge of polite tolerance. It was social exile, delivered with gloved hands. Eleanor attended none of these gatherings. She remained at Blackmore House instead, under Sebastian's quiet invitation. It was unconventional for an unmarried woman to spend time within her fiancé's residence. But propriety bent where power stood firm. Blackmore House was unlike Whitmore House. There was less ornament, more discipline. The staff moved efficiently, not nervously. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, men and women who had served crown and country with severity and loyalty. "You are comfortable here," Sebastian observed one evening as she examined a shelf of medical texts in his private library. "I prefer houses where doors are not locked from the outside," she replied softly. He did not miss the implication. "No door in this house is locked against you," he said. She believed him. That frightened her more than hostility ever had. A letter arrived from Dr. Harrow. It contained no dramatic language, only steady encouragement. "You once told me that knowledge was the only inheritance no one could steal. Remember that now." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. Her father's downfall was no longer theoretical, it was inevitable. Parliament would not imprison a baronet for financial fraud alone, but censure would be public. His credibility would fracture, his influence would diminish. He would be forced to relinquish management of portions of the estate. Those portions would, by law, revert to the rightful heir. Her victory tasted strange, not sweet, not bitter, heavy. One evening, as she prepared to depart Blackmore House for a brief return to Whitmore House, at Sebastian's insistence that appearances must still be maintained, he stopped her at the entrance hall. "You intend to leave," he said, "for an evening, for more than that." She did not deny it. "Once this is concluded," she said, "I will not remain in London." His jaw tightened. "You will be Duchess of Blackmore. I will have achieved what I came to achieve. And then," he asked, "then I will open a clinic in Kent," she said, "for veterans, for women without dowries, for children. You would abandon title. I would abandon confinement." The word lingered. He stepped closer. "Do you believe I intend to confine you?" "I believe marriage often does," she answered. His voice lowered. "I do not." Her breath caught, not visibly, but enough. "You speak as though affection governs you," she said. He held her gaze. "It does." The simplicity of the confession unsettled her more than any forceful claim. "You are certain?" she asked quietly. "I do not miscalculate where it matters." Silence expanded. The space between them felt charged. "You sought me for access," he continued. "You found me instead." She swallowed. "That was not my intention." "I know." The admission made something inside her ache. "I will not be your obligation," she said softly. "You are not, and I will not be your weakness." "You are not," he repeated. She searched his face for arrogance, found none, only steadiness. He lifted his hand slowly, as though granting her time to refuse. She did not. His fingers brushed her cheek, not possession, permission. When his mouth met hers this time, it was not a challenge, it was certainty. He kissed her with deliberate tenderness, as though understanding that breathlessness did not require force. Her hands found his coat without conscious thought. The world narrowed, not to power, not to revenge, to warmth. When he drew back, his forehead rested lightly against hers. "I will not take another wife," he said quietly. "You assume I will accept." "I assume nothing." She closed her eyes briefly. In that moment, vengeance felt smaller, not erased, reframed. Outside, London continued its endless exchange of rumour and ambition. Inside Blackmore House, something far rarer was forming, not control, not manipulation, choice. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had once believed love to be a liability, found herself confronting a truth she had never permitted. Strength shared did not weaken resolve, it fortified it. Her father's fall was imminent, her plan nearly complete. Yet the most dangerous transformation was not his ruin, it was her own. Because for the first time, she was not calculating escape. She was considering staying. Public disgrace does not announce itself with thunder. It arrives in measured tones, stamped seals, and restrained language that cuts more deeply than outrage ever could. The official censure against Lord Edmund Whitmore was delivered on a cold morning beneath a pale sky. Parliament did not imprison him. It did not strip his title entirely, but it did something almost worse. It named him unreliable. It questioned his integrity. It recorded in ink that would outlive him that estate transfers under his authority had been improperly executed and that rightful inheritance had been obscured. The document was read in a chamber that smelled of dust and ambition. Sebastian was present. Eleanor was not. She had chosen not to attend. She did not wish to see her father shrink beneath public scrutiny. She had no desire to witness his humiliation. Vengeance had never required spectacle, it had required correction. By afternoon, London knew. By evening, the invitations ceased entirely. Whitmore House, once bright with laughter and polished deceit, grew quiet. Thomas retreated from his clubs. Creditors no longer bowed when they knocked. Lady Catherine declined calls, claiming headaches that society politely interpreted as shame. Beatrice, however, refused retreat. She appeared at a musicale that same week, dressed in luminous silk, chin lifted high. "I will not be buried by my sister's bitterness," she declared to anyone willing to listen. But even bitterness loses flavor when influence fades. Eleanor returned to Whitmore House one final time before the wedding, as decorum required. The servants' eyes followed her with something new. Not pity, not suspicion. Respect. Her father waited in the study. He did not rise when she entered. Age seemed to have caught him suddenly, as though reputation had been the scaffold holding him upright. "You are satisfied," he said without preamble. Eleanor stood opposite him, hands folded. "I am resolved. You believe this will restore what was lost?" "It will restore what was taken." His lips tightened. "You think your mother innocent. I know she was wronged." He looked away. For a moment, just a moment, she glimpsed something resembling regret. Or perhaps merely resentment at having been exposed. "You always possessed her stubbornness," he said. "I inherited more than that." Silence stretched. "I did what was necessary," he muttered. "For whom?" she asked softly. He did not answer. There are conversations that do not conclude. They simply end. When she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Blackmore will tire of you." Eleanor paused. "Perhaps," she said, "but I will not tire of myself." She left without looking back. Outside, Sebastian waited. He did not ask what had been said. He studied her face instead. "Is it finished?" he asked quietly. "Yes." The word felt strange. Victory had not come with triumph. It had come with clarity. The estate would transfer in part to her name upon marriage. Legal counsel, discreetly arranged by Blackmore, had ensured it. Thomas's debts were contained. Lord Edmund's authority diminished. Justice had been delivered not through fury, but through exposure. And yet, Eleanor felt no lightness, only a shifting horizon. The wedding was set for early summer at Blackmore Abbey in Kent, where fields rolled wide and veterans of past wars walked with slower steps. Invitations were limited. No extravagant display, no public spectacle. The ceremony would be dignified, restrained, deliberate. Much like the man she was about to marry. In the days preceding it, Eleanor remained at Blackmore House. She walked its corridors freely. She visited the stables. She spoke with staff without fear of listening ears. One afternoon, she discovered Sebastian in the estate's infirmary wing, a modest space he had funded quietly after the war. 3 veterans sat at a long table, sleeves rolled, injuries being examined by a physician. "You never mentioned this," she said. "I did not consider it notable." "It is." He glanced at her briefly. "They served. I repay." She stepped closer to the table, observing the careful dressing of a wound. "You believe duty extends beyond battlefield," she said. "Duty does not end," he replied. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. Her dream of a clinic in Kent no longer felt separate from his life. It felt possible within it. That night, as she stood alone in her chamber, Eleanor confronted the truth she had postponed. She had entered this engagement as strategist. She had used his power to dismantle her father's. She had calculated outcomes, anticipated betrayal, prepared exit. And somewhere along the path, she had ceased planning departure. It frightened her more than the falling chandelier, more than whispered conspiracies, because this was not vengeance, it was vulnerability. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Sebastian did not wait for full invitation before entering. "You are troubled," he said. "I am thinking." "That is rarely harmless." She almost smiled. "You knew," she said slowly, "from the beginning that I intended to leave." "Yes." "And yet you continued." "Yes." "Why?" He approached without haste. "Because I do not compete with ghosts," he said. "Nor do I bargain for affection," she swallowed. "I did not offer you love." "You offered honesty," he replied. "It was sufficient." He stopped before her. "If you choose to leave after the wedding," he continued quietly. "I will not chain you." Her breath caught. "You would let me go?" "I would not cage you." The distinction was everything. She searched his face for pride, for possession, for the shadow of control, found none. Only steadiness. "Marriage," she said softly, "terrifies me more than isolation ever did." "Then do not marry for isolation," he answered. She felt her composure thin. "I do not know how to be someone's wife," she admitted. "You know how to stand beside a man," he said. "That is enough." He lifted his hand slowly, not commanding, asking. She placed hers within it. "Do you regret choosing me?" he asked. The question was quiet, dangerous. She considered it. The plan had succeeded. Her father's power diminished, her inheritance secured. She could still leave, still open her clinic alone, still retreat into self-sufficiency. Instead, she stepped closer. "No," she whispered. His hand tightened around hers, not possessively, certainly. The wind moved softly beyond the windows of Blackmore House. In a few days, vows would be spoken, titles affirmed. A duchess would rise from a baronet's daughter once sent away, but more significant than any title, Eleanor Whitmore was no longer acting from wounded resolve. She was choosing, and for the first time in her life, choice felt less like risk and more like trust. The morning of the wedding dawned without spectacle. No blazing sun to bless the union, no storm to warn against it. Only a quiet sky stretched over the Kent countryside, pale and steady, as though the world had chosen composure over drama. Blackmore Abbey stood against rolling green, like something carved from permanence itself, stone walls weathered by centuries, tall arched windows reflecting muted light, ivy climbing upward as though even nature sought elevation there. Eleanor woke before her maid, not from nerves, from awareness. This was the first morning in years that she did not rise with a plan to dismantle something. There was no document to uncover, no confrontation to prepare, no strategy to sharpen, only a choice to make. Her gown lay draped across a velvet chair, ivory silk, long sleeves, modest neckline, delicate embroidery at the cuffs inspired by botanical patterns she had once drawn in Kent. Not adorned for spectacle, adorned for meaning. When her maid entered, she found Eleanor already standing by the window. "Are you well, my lady?" the girl asked gently. "Yes," Eleanor replied. And it was true. At Whitmore House, her father received news of the ceremony without invitation. He had not been forbidden to attend. He had simply not been asked. Thomas remained absent by pride. Beatrice, however, insisted upon attending, not from affection, from defiance. If Eleanor was to rise, Beatrice intended to witness it. The chapel at Blackmore Abbey was intimate, candlelit, solemn. Veterans stood along one wall, hats held respectfully against their chests. A handful of titled guests occupied polished wooden pews. There was no orchestra beyond a simple quartet, no excessive display. Sebastian waited at the altar. He did not fidget. He did not scan the doors anxiously. He stood as he did in battle, still, certain, resolute. When Eleanor entered, the air shifted, not with collective sighs or murmured admiration, with attention. She walked alone, not because she lacked escort, but because she had chosen to. Each step echoed softly against stone. She felt no trembling in her hands, only a steady awareness that the life she had constructed in fragments was now converging. Sebastian's gaze did not waver from her face. He did not look at the gown, or the guests, only at her. When she reached him, the space between them felt deliberate, sacred not from ritual, but from intention. The vows were spoken clearly, without embellishment, without tremor. To stand beside, to protect, to honor. Eleanor's voice did not falter when she pledged herself. Sebastian's did not soften when he vowed fidelity. But when he placed the ring upon her finger, his hand lingered half a second longer than necessary. It was subtle, only she felt it. The chapel did not erupt in applause. It exhaled, Duchess of Blackmore. The title settled upon her not as weight, but as recognition. When they stepped outside, sunlight had strengthened slightly, illuminating the stone courtyard in pale gold. Guests approached in measured sequence. Congratulations were offered, hands were shaken, polite bows exchanged. Beatrice approached last. Her smile was flawless. "I hope you are content, sister," she said sweetly. Eleanor met her gaze calmly. "I am at peace." Beatrice's eyes flickered just briefly at the distinction. Contentment implied satisfaction. Peace implied victory. Sebastian stood beside Eleanor without comment. His presence alone shifted the dynamic. Beatrice inclined her head and withdrew. She had lost. Not the Duke alone. The narrative. The future she had assumed would be hers. When the formalities concluded, Eleanor and Sebastian withdrew to the private gardens beyond the abbey walls. No attendants followed. No witnesses lingered. For the first time since morning, silence returned. "You may still change your mind," Sebastian said quietly. She turned to him. "We are already married." "Titles can be dissolved," he replied evenly. "Freedom remains yours." She studied him carefully. "Why offer escape now?" "Because I would rather be chosen than endured." The words struck deeper than any declaration of passion. Eleanor stepped closer. "I do not endure you," she said softly. He searched her face for hesitation, found none. "Then why do you look as though you are measuring distance?" he asked. She hesitated, not from doubt, from honesty. "I have spent years guarding myself," she admitted. "Trust does not unfold in a day." He nodded once. "I do not expect surrender." "I will not surrender. I do not want surrender," he replied. The wind moved gently through the garden, stirring ivy leaves. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "I once believed marriage would erase me," she said, "reduce me to ornament." His gaze hardened slightly. "You are not fragile glass." "No." She stepped closer still. "And you are not merely ice." His hand lifted to her cheek, not claiming, confirming. When he kissed her this time, there was no audience, no test, no negotiation, only warmth. It was not fierce. It was certain. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his coat without conscious command. He did not rush. He did not dominate. He held her as though she were something chosen carefully, not acquired. When their foreheads rested together, Eleanor felt something she had not anticipated. Not conquest, not triumph, belonging. Later that evening, in the private chambers prepared for them within Blackmore Abbey, the quiet deepened. Candles flickered softly. The world beyond stone walls receded. Eleanor stood near the window, gown loosened, hair freed from its formal arrangement. Sebastian approached from behind, not touching immediately. He gave her time. "You may tell me to stop," he said quietly. She turned. "I will." The honesty steadied them both. When his hands finally found her waist, the contact was deliberate, not hurried, not assumed. His mouth followed the curve of her shoulder, then her throat, then her lips again. He kissed her breathless, not to overpower, but to memorize. Each movement was measured, attentive, as though he feared breaking something delicate that he did not yet fully understand. And she responded not as strategist, not as avenger, but as woman. Later, beneath linen and shadow, she traced the scar along his ribcage, a mark from war. "You carry battles with you," she murmured. "So do you," he replied. Their eyes met in the dimness. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic oaths beyond those already spoken, only shared understanding. Outside, Kent lay quiet. Inside, frost did not vanish entirely. It softened. Because ice does not disappear when warmed, it transforms. and Eleanor Whitmore, now Duchess of Blackmore, realized something in the hush of that first night. She had not been forced into marriage. She had walked into it, and the man beside her did not seek to contain her fire. He sought to stand within it. Marriage did not alter Eleanor's nature. It altered the rhythm of her days. Blackmore Abbey rose each morning with quiet discipline. Staff moved with purposeful efficiency. Correspondence arrived in orderly stacks. Estate matters required signature, review, command. And now, so did she. Duchess. The title followed her through corridors and into conversations. It preceded her name in letters. It altered how men bowed and how women measured their smiles. But it did not erase the girl who had studied anatomy by candlelight. On her third morning as Duchess of Blackmore, Eleanor rose before dawn and walked the eastern grounds alone. The air smelled of dew and soil. Beyond the abbey walls, a cluster of modest cottages housed veterans who had once marched beneath Sebastian's command. Some bore visible scars, others carried wounds less easily seen. She paused outside the small infirmary wing she had visited before the wedding. A single lantern glowed within. Sebastian stood inside, sleeves rolled, speaking with the estate physician over ledgers. He did not notice her at first. He looked younger in moments like this, less carved from marble, more human. "Costs will rise," the physician was saying. "We will require additional supplies if we extend treatment to widows." "Then extend it," Sebastian replied without hesitation. Eleanor stepped inside. "Extend what?" she asked gently. He glanced up. "Care," he said simply. "For whom?" "For those without recourse." She studied the ledger. "You have allocated funds beyond what is required for estate obligations." "Yes, and beyond what is customary for a duke." "I do not measure duty by custom." She held his gaze. "Nor do I." There was a quiet understanding there. Not romance, alignment. Later that week, Eleanor requested a meeting with the estate steward. It startled the staff. Duchesses attended teas. They did not review budgets. But Eleanor had not been raised for ornamental idleness. She studied maps of the estate lands, examined records of tenant leases, calculated unused outbuildings that might be converted. "You intend structural changes," the steward observed carefully. "Yes." "For what purpose, Your Grace?" "For a clinic." The word settled like a stone dropped into still water. "A permanent one," she clarified. "Open to soldiers and labourers alike. No fee." The steward hesitated. "This would require approval." Sebastian entered the room before the hesitation could deepen. "It has it," he said. Eleanor did not look at him immediately. She looked at the steward. "Draw plans," she said calmly. "We begin within the month." Word travelled quickly. Some praised her compassion. Others whispered that a duchess should not entangle herself in the grime of illness. Eleanor heard the whispers. She did not answer them. One afternoon, as she inspected a parcel of land near the abbey gates, a carriage approached unexpectedly. Whitmore House crest. Beatrice stepped down without waiting for assistance. She wore mourning grey, not for death, but for reputation. "Duchess," she greeted coolly. "Lady Beatrice." The air between them felt thinner than ever. "You are very comfortable here," Beatrice observed, glancing toward the abbey. "I am," Eleanor replied. "You have always been adept at reinvention." "I have always been adept at survival." Beatrice's jaw tightened. "Father is ill." The words did not strike like thunder. They settled heavily. "Physically?" Eleanor asked. "Financially, socially, in spirit?" Beatrice's eyes flickered. "He drinks." Eleanor remained still. "And you are content to let him decay." "You confuse consequence with cruelty," Eleanor said quietly. Beatrice stepped closer. "You ruined him." "He ruined himself." Silence. Wind stirred across the field. "You could restore some of his standing," Beatrice pressed, "with a word to your husband." Eleanor met her sister's gaze fully. No. The answer was steady, not vengeful, final. Beatrice's composure fractured. "You have changed," she said bitterly. "No," Eleanor replied. "I have been revealed." When Beatrice departed, Eleanor did not feel triumph, only distance. Sebastian found her later beneath an oak tree near the estate boundary. "You are troubled," he observed. Beatrice came. "And?" "She asked me to intervene on father's behalf." "And you refused?" "Yes." He nodded once. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor considered. "No," she said, "but I do not celebrate it either." Sebastian stepped closer. "Justice is not celebration," he said. "It is correction." She exhaled slowly. "Does it ever cease to ache?" "Yes," he replied quietly. "When you stop revisiting the wound," she studied him. "You speak from experience." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he unbuttoned his cuff and rolled back his sleeve, revealing another scar she had not seen. "War leaves men with choices they revisit too often," he said. She reached out, tracing the healed line with her fingertip. "And marriage?" she asked softly. "What does that leave?" He lifted her hand to his mouth. "It leaves us with witness." The word lingered. Witness. To scars, to change, to growth. That night, in their private chambers, Eleanor found herself restless, not from doubt, from awareness of how deeply her life had shifted. She stood at the window overlooking the nearly finished framework of the future clinic. Lanterns flickered where workers had left tools. Sebastian approached behind her. "You are measuring again," he murmured. "I am recalibrating." "For what?" "For permanence." He wrapped his arms around her waist, not constricting. "Anchoring." "You feared losing yourself," he said quietly. "I still guard against it." "Good," he replied. "I would not know how to love someone who vanished." She turned in his arms. "And do you love me?" she asked, not playfully, simply. "Yes." No hesitation, no embellishment. She searched his face for dramatic flourish. Found none. Just truth. Her breath softened. "I did not intend to love you," she admitted. "I did not require intention." He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, until thought gave way to sensation, until breath shortened, until calculation dissolved. Later, beneath quiet linen, she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady rhythm beneath. Outside, the clinic walls rose. Inside, something steadier formed. She had entered marriage as strategist. She now inhabited it as partner. And for the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore, Duchess of Blackmore, did not wake each morning preparing for battle. She woke preparing to build. Power, once challenged, does not always retreat quietly. It regroups, it calculates, it strikes where pride still burns. The clinic rose steadily along the eastern boundary of Blackmore lands, stone walls reinforced, wide windows positioned to invite light rather than conceal suffering. Word had already spread beyond Kent. Veterans arrived with cautious hope. Widows sent inquiries written in careful script. Eleanor spent her mornings overseeing construction and her afternoons studying cases with the estate physician. Her hands, once confined to delicate embroidery in childhood, now moved confidently among ledgers, bandages, and botanical extracts. London, meanwhile, had not forgotten Whitmore. Lord Edmund's humiliation had not produced repentance. It had produced resentment. His allies in Parliament had distanced themselves publicly, but some still lingered in private drawing rooms, whispering that the Duke of Blackmore's influence had been excessive, that Eleanor had manipulated proceedings, that inheritance disputes were rarely so clean. One evening, a sealed envelope arrived without crest, no signature, only accusation. "Your father's fall will not end quietly. There are records yet to be revealed. Consider what else might surface." Eleanor read the words twice, then folded the letter calmly. Sebastian noticed the shift in her posture before she spoke. "Who?" he asked. "Someone who believes intimidation will move me." "And will it?" "No." He held out his hand. She gave him the letter. His expression darkened as he read. "This is not idle gossip," he said quietly. "I know. You suspect your father. I suspect his pride." Silence lingered between them. "He will attempt to wound where he believes you most vulnerable," Sebastian said. "And where is that?" she asked. His gaze did not waver. "Your reputation." Eleanor inhaled slowly. In Regency England, a woman's reputation was not merely social ornament. It was currency, survival, access. "Let him try," she said. Sebastian stepped closer. "You underestimate how far men will go when cornered, and you underestimate how far I have already gone." The following week, rumours began circulating in London salons. Whispers that Eleanor's time in Kent had not been as innocent as portrayed, that her association with a rural physician had been improper, that the Duke had married hastily to preserve appearances. It was vile, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Though no formal accusation surfaced, the suggestion alone was enough to reopen scrutiny. Letters of support arrived from a few steadfast allies, but invitations to certain elite gatherings paused. The tone shifted. Sebastian's response was immediate and unyielding. He travelled to London without announcing it to Eleanor. When he returned 2 days later, his jaw was set in a line she recognized from stories of battlefield command. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "I met with those who circulate poison, and they will reconsider." She studied him carefully. "You threatened them." "I informed them." "With what?" "With truth," he said. He did not elaborate. She did not ask further. But London's tone altered almost overnight. Rumours dissipated, whispers redirected. 2 minor lords who had repeated slander publicly found their financial dealings under inconvenient review. One withdrew from society altogether. Sebastian had not raised his voice. He'd raised consequence. Still, the attempt left a mark. That evening, Eleanor stood alone in the unfinished clinic hall, watching dusk settle through tall windows. She had thought justice complete. She had not anticipated retaliation. Sebastian entered quietly behind her. "You should not stand alone in half-built structures," he said. "I am not alone," she replied. He moved closer. "Your father was behind it," he said. "Indirectly." "I know. He will attempt again." "Yes." Silence stretched. "I will not allow them to tarnish you," he continued. She turned toward him. "You cannot fight every whisper. I can fight enough of them. And if it costs you politically, it will not. You are certain." "Yes." She held his gaze. "And if it did?" He paused, then, "I would choose you." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any threat. "You should not say that lightly," she murmured. "I do not." She stepped closer, resting her palm against his chest. "I do not wish to be your vulnerability." "You are not." "Then what am I?" His hand covered hers. "You are my equal." The word steadied her. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against stone walls that were nearly complete. "I thought vengeance would conclude everything," she admitted quietly. "It rarely does. It only begins consequence." "Yes." She exhaled. "I do not regret exposing him, nor should you. But I see now that justice does not erase history." "No," he agreed, "it reshapes it." He tilted her chin upward gently. "You are not defined by their accusation." "I know, but it wounds regardless." "Yes." His mouth found hers, not urgent, not fierce. Grounding. She leaned into him fully. No calculation, no guarded edge, only trust. Later that night, as they lay beneath heavy linen and fading candlelight, Eleanor traced the faint scar along his shoulder. "Did you ever fear?" she asked softly. That loving someone would weaken you? He considered. No. Why? Because weakness lies in concealment, he said, not in attachment. She rested her head against him. Outside Blackmore Abbey, the final stones of the clinic were set in place. Inside, Eleanor felt something settle within her. She had faced exile, humiliation, danger, and now slander. Each had tested her resolve, but none had broken it, because she was no longer standing alone against a hostile world. She was standing beside a man who did not seek to contain her strength, but to defend it. And in that defense, Frost did not vanish. It transformed into something steadier, warmer, unshakable. The clinic opened without fanfare, no grand procession, no orchestra. Only a simple wooden sign placed beside the gate, Blackmore House Infirmary, open to all who need care. The first morning, veterans arrived before sunrise, a man missing 2 fingers, a widow with a coughing child, a former foot soldier who limped more from memory than injury. Eleanor stood at the entrance, sleeves rolled, hair tied back without ornament, not as Duchess. As physician's apprentice once more, Sebastian stood a step behind her, not overshadowing, supporting. When the doors opened, something shifted across the estate grounds. It was not spectacle, it was purpose. Inside, long tables were arranged with clean linens, cabinets stocked with herbs and tinctures Eleanor had prepared herself. A small corner desk reserved for records, carefully ordered. By midday, the hall was filled, not with desperation, with relief. Sebastian moved among the men he once commanded, offering steady words, brief nods, quiet respect. He did not wear military medals that day. He wore plain black. Eleanor watched him from across the room. He was not cold here. He was controlled, measured, present. When a child began to cry as a wound was cleaned, Eleanor knelt, her voice soft, steady. The child calmed beneath her touch. Sebastian observed. He had faced cannon fire without flinching, but this humbled him. Later that afternoon, a carriage arrived unexpectedly at the far gate, Whitmore Crest. Eleanor did not need to look twice. Beatrice stepped down first. Her expression was not triumphant, not bitter, uncertain. Behind her, Lord Edmund descended slowly. Age had advanced more in months than in years. He did not meet Eleanor's gaze immediately. He looked instead at the building, at the veterans, at the simple sign. "This is what you chose," he said quietly. "Yes," Eleanor replied, "you could have lived in London." "I do live," she answered. Silence stretched between them. He seemed smaller here, not because of diminished title, because power did not bend the air around him in this place. "You have made yourself difficult to ignore," he said finally. "I never sought to be ignored." Beatrice shifted beside him. "We did not come to quarrel," she said, voice less sharp than before. "Why did you come?" Eleanor asked. Her father inhaled slowly. "To see." "See what?" "If ruin was worth it." The words did not strike like accusation. They sounded tired. Eleanor glanced around the infirmary hall, at the men seated in orderly rows, at the women receiving medicine, at the quiet hum of purposeful movement. "Yes," she said. The answer was not cruel. It was true. Lord Edmund nodded once. He did not apologize. Some men never did. But when he turned to leave, his posture carried less arrogance, more acceptance. Beatrice lingered a moment longer. "You are different here," she murmured. "I am myself here." Beatrice studied her, then glanced toward Sebastian. "He does not cage you." "No," Eleanor said softly. "He stands beside me." Beatrice's gaze flickered. Not envy. Something like reconsideration. Then she too departed. Sebastian approached only after the carriage had vanished down the lane. "You expected this," he said. "Yes. Are you satisfied?" Eleanor considered. I am settled. He nodded. There was no need for more. Evening fell gradually across Kent. The clinic doors closed. Lanterns were lit along the corridor. Eleanor remained behind to complete notes, hands stained faintly with tincture. Sebastian entered quietly, removing his gloves. "You have not rested," he said. "I will." He stepped behind her, placing his hands gently at her waist, not commanding, not claiming, simply there. "You once feared marriage would diminish you," he murmured. "I did. And now—" She turned within his arms. "I understand it differently." "How?" "It does not erase," she said softly. "It reveals." He leaned down, brushing his mouth against hers, slowly, deliberately, until breath shortened, until thought softened, until the world narrowed to warmth. He kissed her breathless, not because he sought dominance, but because he sought her. Every night since their wedding he had kissed her that way, not as conquest, as confirmation. In their private chamber later, candlelight flickered against stone walls. Eleanor stood by the window overlooking the clinic grounds. Lanterns glowed faintly below. "I once believed love was a liability," she said quietly. "And now?" Sebastian asked from behind her. She turned. "Now I believe it is alignment." He crossed the room. "And what are we aligned toward?" She took his hand and guided it toward her heart. "Building." He smiled faintly, rare, genuine. He drew her close. And as night deepened beyond Blackmore Abbey, frost did not return. Not because it had vanished, but because it had found warmth strong enough to remain without breaking. Some women are taught that strength requires solitude. Some men are taught that power requires distance. But there are unions that challenge both lessons, where justice does not erase tenderness, where love does not weaken resolve, where two guarded hearts do not collapse into dependency, but rise into partnership. Lady Eleanor Whitmore sought vengeance. She found restoration. Sebastian Ashcroft ruled with ice. He discovered warmth he did not anticipate, and in choosing one another, not from desperation, not from obligation, but from clarity, they reshaped not only their own future, but the ground upon which they stood. Love, when chosen freely, is not surrender, it is alliance. If this story moved you, if you believe strength and tenderness can exist together, consider supporting this journey. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe for more historical romances where resilience meets devotion. And return soon. There are many more stories waiting in the quiet corridors of history.